and train art in issues of libraries, technology, and user experience design. And please join me in welcoming Sarah Houghton-Jan. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jason. I'm really glad to be speaking to you guys here today. If you have any difficulty hearing me, just pop it in a chat if sound goes wonky or if anything else looks difficult. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop those in a chat at any time, and I'll do my best to keep my eye on the chat so I can answer them as we go. So as Jason said, I have kind of been traveling around talking to libraries about the future for libraries as I see it. And I just want to do a little disclaimer at the beginning, which is that I don't have any kind of magical abilities to see the future. But these are some things that we should be thinking about, I think, and some things that will help us build the future that we want for libraries and that our communities want. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I would recommend is to actually just take a moment and stop and think about what libraries and technology look like today. And that could be your own library, or it could be a library that really does technology well that you would wish you were working for, or that you envy and wish you could bring some of those ideas back into your library. And so thinking about what the landscape is like today is very informative in helping us decide what the future is going to look like and what it is going to take us to get there. And I think what all of us really hope for when we start talking about the future of libraries is a clear-cut path. You know, we want someone to say, yes, this is what it's going to look like. These are the 20 steps that you take to get there. And here is a roadmap to get you from where you are now to where you want to be. And unfortunately, it truly isn't ever going to be that simple because the future is ever shifting. As you know, things change so quickly now, especially with the increasing pace of change with technology, with the way that people communicate and interact. And there is no clear-cut path. I think some of the licensing issues we've seen with digital content have thrown the future into a much different path than it was on 3 or 4 years ago. The popularity of smartphones has thrown us into a different path. And so think of it more as kind of a very meandering hiking path with a lot of rocks and plants and little critters running out when you least expect it to scare the pants off of you. That's more like what our path forward is going to look like. And I think we just need to make peace with that and realize that the future is going to be a little bit bumpy and require us to constantly shift and to make adjustments. The biggest question, I think, is for you, and it's what do you want libraries and technology to be? And what do you want the future of libraries to be and to mean to your communities? What do you want a library to look like in 10 years? And your answer to that question should be driving the decisions that you make today so that you can build up toward that future, so that you can end up in the place that you want to end up in. So many of us are talking about what libraries are today and how they're so broken. But if we look at what we want them to be like, that will push us in the right direction. So a lot of people think about what is changing in library technology. So what's changing? What are things that we need to pay attention to? What's the landscape like? What are the few top 5 things that we should be paying attention to? And instead, I would encourage people to think about what's changing in technology in general. So instead of that, just think about what are you seeing your community using? What are your friends and family using? What kind of technology changes globally are happening that can or potentially might affect the things that we do for service for our communities? Because that's going to really drive what we're going to do. Another question that we tend to ask a lot is what's changing in library user needs? We look at our users, user-centered design, user experience design, and thinking more about the user as the center of every last thing that we do. And that's wonderful, but instead of just limiting ourselves to what the library looks like, just think about what's changing in your community's needs on the whole. So what new things are arising in your community? What does the face of your community look like? How are things changing? What are people needing that they didn't need 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 1 year ago? Those differences, I think, looking outside of those libraries' four walls, looking outside of your library user base to people who are non-users, who have chosen not to use libraries over time, that's going to help you look toward a path forward, toward a future that's going to work for those people as well as for your diehard library supporters that you see every day. Something else we look a lot at when we're doing projects or perhaps a new proposal is what's happening in other libraries. And that's a great question to ask because often someone else has done it before us. We can learn from their mistakes. We can maybe build on something that they've already started building. But instead of that, don't think about just libraries, but look out toward businesses as well. And not just businesses that are really big and popular and that are global names and brands, but look at local businesses. So locally, what's happening in businesses that may reflect the change in your community? What kinds of marketing strategies are they using that are working really well for them? What kinds of nifty little technologies perhaps are they using that are working really well? Those techniques can be implemented in libraries as well, often quite successfully and with very little change. And I think that kind of looking outside of this little bubble that we've built around ourselves in libraries is really important. There's often reference made to the echo chamber on the web where you kind of insulate yourself, whether you think you are or not, in this little bubble of people who agree with you, people who have the same interests that you do. And that's the very nature of how social networking today works, is that you choose to connect with people that you want to connect with, that you know, people that you trust, that you know, whose belief system matches up with yours. And unfortunately, that means that a lot of times we don't see what's happening outside that bubble. We don't hear what's happening outside of that library bubble world. And so I encourage everyone after today to perhaps go online and find one or two blogs or Twitter feeds or something from people outside of your normal sphere of interaction and start seeing what's coming in through those pipelines as well. You're more likely to find inspiration there than with all the rest of us in library world who often say the same thing over and over again. Another question is what's changing in what people do every day. And this is an interesting question to ask because it can affect pretty much everything from what people do when they wake up. As I was telling Jason, got my Red Bull and my Techno to help me wake up this early in the morning. And what do people do during their days at work? What do they do with their family, with their friends? How are they shopping? How are they consuming information? But I think that idea of what's changing what people do is semi-abstract, and so it could kind of throw people off a little bit. So instead, just look directly at your friends and family. So, how has your mom's interaction with the web changed, if your mom does interact with the web at all? How has your friends' use of the library, if they use the library, changed? How do your neighbors pick up their kids after school? And how are those kids' activities maybe different than what you did when you were in school? All of those little questions, those little simple daily habits that we're usually aware of without even having to ask the person what they're doing. We just know what they do every day. Those answers, again, can gear library services and help us decide what we need to do differently. I think a good example of that is work together days. And if you're not familiar with the concept, it's for people who telecommute, and there's an increasing number of people who work from home. It gives them a chance once a week, once every month, to work together in a room with other people who telecommute. And it's simply the library or another entity in the community providing a workspace for people with power outlets, with Wi-Fi access, maybe with office supplies, where they can do their work but be around other people. And because of that change in the way that people work, that boom in telecommuting, it's provided us with a library service that we can provide that does fit our mission and that will work for people in the community we may not have reached before. So asking your friends and family kind of how their lives are different can help you out. So a few of the things that I think we really need to focus on as we look forward for the library's future is reaffirming all of our core values. So we have some very deeply held beliefs in libraries, and I think for the last maybe few years, I've noticed a little bit of a trending away from this. We're trending toward just trying desperately to keep up with the pace of change and forgetting maybe what our core belief system is. So complete and balanced information, critical to what we do in libraries. Focusing on all three of these things: education, entertainment, and self-improvement. And depending on what kind of library you work for, maybe more so one of those than the others. Research assistance. This has always been core to what we do, helping connect people to the information that they need efficiently, quickly, and in a way that works for them. Freedom of information access, so making sure that people do have access to the information that they choose, that they do have the ability to access information free of barriers, and that's a value we hold very, very dear. And then finally, information privacy and security. And this is a big one that we've focused on big time for many, many years. But it's interesting that as the privacy threats in a lot of the online services have taken off, as security has become an issue, making sure people are very cognizant of what kind of information they're sharing with whom and where they're sharing it, I've seen less and less focus in libraries on those issues in terms of programming for your customers, making people aware of it with informational resources. It's almost like after the Patriot Act kind of fizzled out of public consciousness, we kind of forgot about this whole information privacy and security thing. So I think that's another thing that we could focus on going forward that would guide us in the right direction. And overall, I guess my point is just, we know what we are, we know what we do, we know what we believe in. And what we need to do is to take all of those things, wrap them up in a package, and give them to our customers and our users in a way that will help them in their daily lives and give them what they need, but always staying true to our mission and to ourselves. So this is like the most popular slide ever, but it's what I think is expected when people ask me to talk about the future of libraries. They think, oh, there's 5,000 things that I'm supposed to be focusing on. This is the future of libraries. It's all these little services that spring up one day and go away the next. This is what we're supposed to be doing, and I don't think it's that important, and I'd rather not focus my attention on these 500 things. I could not agree more. There are probably 4 or 5 of the things that are on this slide that you should probably be aware of and at least using on a semi-regular basis. Other than that, I don't know what half of the things on this slide even are. I don't even recognize the names, and that's okay. The biggest thing is to simply be aware of services, new things, new projects, new ideas, and not just new technology, but just new ideas, new service models, new methods of serving your community, being aware of what's out there, and then being able to pick out that handful, that 2 or 3 that will really make a difference to your community and implementing them in your library. You don't need to be aware of every single last thing that's come out. I give you permission to not be aware, and I hope that you can take that to heart and go home and not read all of your RSS feeds and your Twitter stream and be okay with that. Something that I think we do see a lot that to me just brought home how crazy and integral technology is to what we're doing today is that in airports I'm seeing these recharging zones springing up, and they're called different things in different places. This one's sponsored by Verizon, and all the Verizon ones kind of look the same. But so they had 5 little recharging stations with outlets and room to sit in these uncomfortable, horrible little wooden stools. And there was a line of about 20 people just standing there waiting for the recharging station. And airports are notoriously horrible for power outlets. You see people kind of like leaned up in a corner, viciously protecting that power outlet like it's their firstborn child, so that they can power up their laptop before they get on their plane. And I think that the advent of these recharging zones, and they truly have sprung up like crazy, just says how much people need power in their day-to-day lives. And I would ask, how are we dealing with that in libraries? Are we dealing with that successfully? Are we giving people easy access to power outlets or power strips without tripping hazards? I know that's a big one for us. Are we giving people access to high-quality Wi-Fi service? Are we giving people a comfortable place to sit with good lighting where they can use their devices, whether it's a laptop, a smartphone, a tablet, whatever? These are things that people need wherever they go, and the library is one of those places. This was in another airport, the Las Vegas airport, but of course, so it's the eBay slot machine. And I was traveling with a friend who's not super techie, and she was commenting, I can't believe that eBay's everywhere. eBay even has a slot machine in Vegas, and people know what it is. They walk by and they want to try it and they want to take pictures of it. And it's true because eBay truly has become a brand that is just simply completely recognizable by most of the populace. They know what eBay is even if they don't use it. And again, I can remember using eBay back when nobody was using eBay, when it was a Pez collector site. And now it's a name brand, it's a global brand, and it's one that has permeated society. I don't, however, recommend putting a slot machine in the library. Just want to make that clear. Don't want to get in any trouble. So this is a picture of how I see our online lives today, including eBay. eBay's in there somewhere. It's very fragmented, and I see what we do is kind of broken into these kind of 5 general categories. Education, where we have things like video casts where we're learning, maybe Wikipedia where we go for some initial reference questions, some ready reference info. Professional information, where we're perhaps looking at online periodicals, professional organizational sites. Communication is a big one, and this is where I think a lot of people spend a lot of their time online with Twitter, IM, Facebook. Entertainment, got Netflix. If anyone tries to ever take my Netflix away, they will be harmed. YouTube, retail therapy, whatever you're doing. And then the web at large. So this kind of background layer of things like web search, Amazon, things that permeate across these 4 categories. And my question is, where do digital libraries fit into this? And I don't know that there's really an answer to that. I'm not really sure because I think we tap on all 5 of these categories. I think we fit into all of these areas. We provide services in all of them. But where do we actually fit? And what does that look like to our customers? And are we able to compete with some of these other services and sites in a way that works for our customers? And that's a very difficult question. But I think the step of recognizing that our online lives are fragmented and people do have all of these different kind of pots in the fire is important. We need to think about our own lives and realize that some other people in our communities may not even be using these services, may not be online, may not be using the tools and techniques that we use, but most likely their lives are still, put into these categories in their minds. And so thinking about what the library can do for each of these areas, I think can help out. In libraries, we have built this, a tower to the book. This was a book sculpture in the Rochester Institute of Technology library. And it to me is very symbolic of what we've done. So books are great. Books are awesome. I'm even reading a printed book right now for the first time in like 6 months. I usually read it online, but books, they are wonderful. They are packages of information. They are containers for great deals of learning opportunities and educational opportunities and entertainment. But they're one thing. And I think we've forgotten that there's this whole other world happening outside of this. And I'm not just talking digital. I mean, libraries have really let music kind of pass us by and haven't made as big an investment in music or in movies, documentaries. We haven't really bought into those other media. And now that everything's moving digital, this book tower, I think, is even more dangerous for us. We need to recognize that books are important. Books have been core to what we've done for a very, very long time. But we do have other things that we need to build towers to. And so leaving this one alone and building some new towers, I think, is the next step. One question I get often is, what does the library usage look like today? And this is a very vague pie chart made from stats that I was looking at over a few different libraries that I've worked at over the last decade and seeing the trend of things as they've changed. And where we're at today is that about 60% of your users use both your brick and mortar library, they go into the building, and they use your online virtual services. You've got about 30% that only use your online stuff. So these are people you never see. They came in, got their cards, left, they use all the digital stuff from home, and they're fine. And then you've got this small slice of 10% of people who only use the brick and mortar library, who come in, don't want to hear about ebooks, don't want to hear about your databases, don't want to hear about how they can check their account online from home. Unfortunately, I see in a lot of libraries that that is where people focus their attention. So a lot of their time goes toward this small 10%, the people who aren't interested in technology. And to answer Bruce's question, if this chart is public and academic, yes, it is. And so I think it's really, really very key that we focus our attention on this whole pie chart and recognize that we do have people who fall into different categories of use, and everybody isn't the same as those few people that we see who may not be interested in one or the other type of service. Most of your users are going to be interested in both. So just some quick trends to keep us kind of on point with looking at where things are going. If you want to stay up with where things are going in libraries, some of the interesting internet statistics, tech statistics, how people are using digital services, the Pew and Internet and American Life reports are a great resource for that, and these are all statistics from their reports. Right now, 66% of US adults have broadband at home, and that's low compared to other countries that are similar to ours. And like Australia, I was just there, and it's something like 85%. So yeah, so why is it so low? That's an interesting question, and in your community it may be higher, it might be lower. But knowing that rate, I think, is important to determining what your remote services look like. 89% of US adults own a mobile phone of some kind, and 40% have 3G or other internet access on that device. So that indicates that it's a smartphone of some type that has internet access right on the device itself. And that number is growing like gangbusters. So that is going super, super fast. And I think we need to realize that that smartphone trend is really taking over our users. And the predictions are that everyone, more or less, everyone is going to have a smartphone as their default mobile phone within the next 3 years. And that's just the way that the technology is moving, and we need to be keeping pace with it. 35% of US internet users have apps on their phones, but only 24% of them actually use them. And so that shows us that people have these technologies and devices, but maybe aren't aware of how to use them in the best way. And so maybe that's a gap that we could fill. Texting, so we've got 72% of adults text every single day. And the average is 10 texts per day. That's higher than what I do. And then 87% of teens are texting, and 50 a day for teenagers. So that shows a real difference in that one technology and how texting is being used. And this is a really recent study, and I anticipate that this will maybe change slightly. Maybe adults will start texting more. It's definitely gone up since the last time they looked at similar numbers. 65% of US internet users pay for online content, so that could be paying to download a movie, it could be iTunes, it could be any number of things, but that's a full 2/3 of internet users of any kind that are actually paying for content online. And some of that content, I'm going to guess, they could be getting for free through the library, so it could be an ebook, an audiobook. This is stuff that we could be giving them for free, so spreading the word that we have that stuff is important. So from 2009 to 2010, social networking skyrocketed among older adults, and it's important to recognize that trend's still continuing this year. And I think this is another area where we could help, is helping older adults kind of navigate that social networking landscape and figure out how to use these tools to stay in touch with family and friends, or to network, or to, a lot of older adults are running businesses from their homes. So how do they do that to the best of their ability? 42% of US adults and a full 53% of US internet users use Wikipedia on a regular basis. So yes, some people hate Wikipedia, but you know what? It's there. People use it. I think the fact that it is ranked so highly in Google results for basic searches has a lot to do with that. But the public awareness of Wikipedia has grown. And with that, I think, comes our responsibility, as with all information sources, to show people what its strengths are and what its points of possible weakness are. And again, that's just another opportunity for us to educate our communities. And gadget ownership. So again, looking at what people have in their bags, in their pockets. And it's interesting, as these numbers really reflect a reality, they don't reflect perception, I think. So You're looking at the first numbers, they all make sense. Cell phones, yes. Desktop and laptop computers are pretty high. And then you get down to these tiny, tiny little numbers at the end, ebook readers and tablets. So this was in August and September of 2010, so not that long ago. And ebook reader use almost, I think, went up by about 60% in that time period because of the holiday season. A lot of people got ebook readers. But still, ebook readers and tablets, iPad, Samsung Galaxy, whatever, those are the things it seems like we're focusing on a lot, but the ownership and market permeation of those is still very, very small. So recognizing that and recognizing where the bulk of our users' ownership is, I think is important. That kind of touchstone with reality. Likewise, only 8% of US internet users use Twitter. And you see everywhere, follow us on Twitter, do this on Twitter, use this hashtag to do whatever you're trying to do. And interestingly, it's only really reaching 8% of US internet users. That's it. People are aware that Twitter exists, but most people don't use it. And it's good for libraries to be in Twitter. It's good for us to use that tool as a way to reach out to people. But again, recognize you're not hitting the bulk of your internet users that way. Similarly, a lot of discussion has happened about location-based services like Foursquare, Gowalla, Facebook Places. That's even lower, 4%. 4% of people are using those services. Now, I'm among that 4% and I enjoy it, but I have to recognize that my reality is not the reality of the other 96% of the internet users in my community. So again, it's a tool to use, but again, focus your resources where you're going to have the most impact, and it might not be on Foursquare. So some trends for us to look at, I think things to think about, things that I see as I'm following where the world is going, where technology is going, where the development of information access is going. The biggest thing that I'm seeing is the device continuum. So we used to have monstrous, gargantuan computers, right? Just these huge, giant desktop computers that weighed more than a small child. And then we were so excited when Palm Pilots came out. Those were so awesome. I just remember Palm Pilots being revolutionary, and they truly were at the time. It was amazing. Now you don't see as big a difference. You see this sliding scale of screen size and sliding scale of capability. So the desktop computer is still a lot more powerful than our other devices, but the difference between an iPhone and an iPad isn't that great. And then if you compare that to a MacBook laptop and you compare that to a Mac desktop computer, it's not as clear cut anymore. The differences are very minor. And if you look at the screen size and you look at the computing power, the two are always connected. And that makes sense. And I think the thing for us to realize is, as people are accessing our online resources, it's no longer through one of two types of devices. It's through this whole spectrum of things that we need to pay attention to. And the size of those screens, the capabilities of those devices is going to be all over the chart, all over the map. It's going to all be different. And we need to be able to provide our services to all of those users. And for the subscription resources that we pay for, our downloadable content, our online resources, journals, magazines, newspapers, all of that stuff needs to work on all of these devices, regardless of type, manufacturer, or size. And that is a message I think we need to be getting across to our vendors very, very clearly. Likewise, touchscreens I think are really taking off. If you've ever used the Microsoft Touch Surface, the image in the upper left-hand corner, it's amazing. The DOC library in the Netherlands, it's spelled D-O-K, they've done amazing things with the Microsoft Touch Surface. They've created local history resources. People slap their library cards down, it reads the barcode, knows their address from their patron database, and then pulls in local historical photos from their neighborhood, which they can then manually drag over to an image for a flash drive and then take the flash drive home with them. And that's just incredible. What's with the wine? Yeah, we can't probably do wine in a library, but I think they're doing a wine tasting and then looking at information about the vineyards. Yeah, that'd be fun to do, but I know usually you can't have alcohol in the library. And then in the lower right-hand corner, we've started to see laptops with touch screens come out. And if you've ever watched a a young child interact with a laptop or a desktop computer, they want to touch the screen. They think everything is going to be a touch screen. And I think soon everything will have that touch capability. So being aware of that and being aware how touch is going to interact with some of our resources online is important. There's also kind of this idea of always having your data with you, your online identity with you wherever you go. And this is the Atrix phone from Motorola. It's got a great little laptop dock, and that's what they call this little laptop thing. And it's literally, you smack the smartphone onto the back in this little dock, you flip the laptop open, and this laptop is no more than a dumb terminal, basically, running off of the smartphone's computing power and connection. And I think you're going to see more things like this over time. This, to me, is like the first awkward stab at this idea of your device has your identity, your information, your accounts, your preferences on it. You slap it into a generic interface that's more comfortable to use, and that's what you use when you're at that location. Then you pick up your device, move to another location, slap it down, and use it again. I see a future where we have screens literally painted on walls, where we just drop our smartphone down onto a desktop surface that recognizes who we are and projects our screen up onto the wall, where we then interact with it as a touch surface, and that's how we get data every day. That's the future I want to still be alive for when it happens, and I think it will. I'm guessing probably about 10 years or so. But that idea of always having your data with you is one that's very real today. Internet TV kind of came and then has fizzled a little bit as the technology has been discovered to be a little bit awkward. But Google TV, Apple TV, all of these competing services, I think are pointing toward one trend, which is that there's no longer this clear-cut line between the internet and television and movies and music. It's all everywhere together. And so people expect to have access to any movie anytime from their television, and they don't want to have to pay a cable provider, $8 per pay-per-view in order to do it. That idea of having access through a broadband connection or a wireless connection to whatever content you can find online and then viewing it on your TV is one that our users are demanding. And how does the library fit into that? How do we provide services in an age of internet TV? How do we get in there and perhaps replace some of those services for some of our users who can't afford them? 3D. Has anyone tried anything 3D? Maybe a 3D television or the Nintendo 3DS? If you have, just pop it into chat or raise your hand. I think 3D can make you a little bit dizzy. Having tried the 3D gaming platform, I kind of felt like I was a little bit nauseous, to be honest. And I've heard that from a lot of people. Also, I think the barrier of having to wear glasses while you watch most of the 3D televisions is a big one. But people are interested. And I think in a year or so going forward, the prediction right now is that any new television coming out will be 3D by default, will have 3D capability at least. You don't have to view 3D all the time. But what does that mean for our collections? Do we need to start providing 3D movies for people? What about the glasses? How do we fit into this? How do we provide that service? And I don't have the answer to that. I think that's a tricky one. It's one of those technologies that's still pretty nascent, and we haven't decided as libraries yet if we're jumping on board with it, I think. Looking at downloading versus streaming is also a really important, I think, concept for all of us to at least grasp. And this idea of people downloading a chunk of content, a file that they can put somewhere and then say, I own this, kind of like a replacement for having a CD on your shelf or a book on your shelf, versus the more, I think, adopted idea of content today, which is streaming, which is I don't necessarily have to own a copy of this thing, but I want to have access to it when I want it. And so services like Rdio, services like Netflix, where you have streaming audio, where you have streaming music, or you have streaming movies, are more popular with people of all ages than this idea of downloading something and like owning it forever and ever and ever. And so again, that really screws with the library's model. So the library's model is we own stuff, or in the case of most digital content, we at least license it. But if the process is still someone downloads a chunk of content, usually DRM protected, but a chunk of content nonetheless. How do we fit into a streaming model? So if we had a subscription to a service like Rdio, which is basically, think of it as streaming pretty much any song you can ever think of from anybody when you feel like it, and you just pay your $4.99 a month. How does the library fit into that service model? How do we provide that kind of service to our users when that's the type of thing that they expect from us? And I think that's a difficult question to answer. How do we fit in with a movie model in the same idea? I think there is a place for us, and I've been in talks with Rdio about a library model that they could launch, and hopefully they will soon. But I'm not sure, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. 3D printing is also fascinating. If you've ever used or heard of or seen videos of 3D printing, feel free to put your thoughts into the chat. So what this is, if you remember the old dot matrix printers that kind of went ring as you print it out line by line, that's what this is, but it's three-dimensional. So you create a 3D design using CAD drafting software, basically. So you have this 3D digital layout of what you want to create. And then you load it into this little box that you can see over on the left, and it prints it out of this little resin composite stuff. And you can print everything out from a fancy cathedral to a little director's chair to salt and pepper shakers that actually work. And it's amazingly cool. It's several $100s for the box. The resin is very cheap. I'm trying to set up a program in our library where we teach the kids how to use the 3D modeling software, and then we print the stuff out for them in the library. So they bring us their design, we'll print it out for you, and that could be a new service for us. But what's happened is that we've reached the technological singularity. And if you've heard of this, the technological singularity is basically when robots can start self-replicating, and the MakerBot can make itself now, more or less without human interaction. And that's a little scary. So be aware, the robots are coming and the uprising is near. I also think we need to focus on net neutrality. So being aware of what the legal debates are, pro and con for net neutrality, is really important. I think libraries on the whole are standing behind net neutrality, the idea that all pieces of data are created equal, that a service provider like Comcast shouldn't be able to decide that Netflix gets privileged above iTunes or the other way around, that data is data is data. And following what's going on with that is something I think we should all be doing and educating our customers about. On the lines of data, think about who owns your data. So this is the wonderful Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, and met him once. He's he's just about as weird as people say he is. And he owns our data. I mean, he owns everything. Everything that you put into Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg owns, pretty much. And that's why he's as rich as he is, because we have willingly, voluntarily shared so much data on Facebook, as our customers have as well. And that data is now collectible, transferable to other companies, mostly people who want to sell us stuff. So being aware of that, being aware of what you're putting out there into the universe and who owns it, is an area I think where we can help educate our users. There's a great website that ALA put out, privacyrevolution.org, which gives some really, really good information on how to keep your own privacy, your own freedom to read, sacrosanct. And it does give us good resources for how to educate our users. There's also the whole idea of the cloud. So cloud computing has really taken off, and pretty much everybody's using cloud computing, whether they realize it or not. If you think about where your email is, most likely it's in the cloud somewhere. A lot of people get wary of the cloud, but my argument to that is, where is your money in the bank? Do you really think they have a shoebox with your name on it in the back with just a bunch of bills stacked in there? Or not even bills, gold, right? Because bills don't really matter. No, of course they don't. It's in the cloud. So you're banking in the cloud, so I think it's okay to do other things in the cloud, like store your documents, email, share data. The cloud is a tool to be used to the best of its ability, not necessarily something to be afraid of. So the way that I see it looking forward is that the challenge of all of this digital proliferation, is really an opportunity for us to take advantage of. It's not necessarily a a challenge in a bad way. It's an opportunity for us to grow and morph and become the library that we want our libraries to be. So for our collections, looking at digital versus physical collections, how much of our budget are we allocating to each? How is our selection process working? And how is access working while we're closed? All of those things are important. There's been an explosion in digital use. We all know this. These are stats from 09 to 10 at my last employer, San Jose Public Library, and everything was going up, but especially our extended web presence use. So people's use of our Twitter, Facebook pages, our events calendars on other event sites other than our own little calendar, those things were skyrocketing, and that was an important piece for us to recognize, was that our website might matter a little bit, but where we were everywhere else on the web was starting to matter more. Also with digital collections specifically, focusing on user awareness. I mean, we've all heard the customers say, I had no idea you had ebooks. And that's true, most people don't. So making sure people know what we have, what the different formats are that we offer, and that those formats will work for most people on their devices. How digital rights management plays into all of this digital content, what that creates as a barrier for our users. What the different owning and leasing models are for our content. Most of our ebooks and other digital content we don't own. We're merely leasing on a year-to-year subscription basis. And being aware what that means for the library long-term in terms of its ability to preserve the cultural record, that's critical. And device support, so making sure that we are there to help people get their data on the devices they choose. I encourage you to take a look at the ebook Users Bill of Rights, something that Andy Woodworth drafted along with a little bit of help from me. Not much, Andy's brilliant, but it does outline some ideas of how this digital content can play into the future and what we think as librarians are important elements to preserve moving forward to make sure that users continue to have access to the information that they choose. I hate digital rights management with a passion, and there's a great campaign, Librarians Against DRM, that gets into this whole idea of how digital content interacts with our library environment and what digital content will look like if digital rights management continues to proliferate. And then HarperCollins, of course, we love the HarperCollins debate. So if you want to keep track with what's going on with HarperCollins and their policy that they implemented a month or so ago to limit the number of ebook checkouts life term to 26 for libraries, and then you got to buy another one. You can follow on Twitter using the hashtag HCOD, and that helps kind of keep track of what's going on with that debate. But again, it's an important change to the landscape that we're living in, and hopefully not one for the worse. There's also a great website called lisvendor.info, and it's a wiki where people are adding data about their experience with different vendors in the library world and whether you're having good experiences, bad experiences, what kinds of contract terms you're getting, what kinds of legal issues have come up, negotiation tips or tricks that have worked with different vendors. It's just starting out. It's only been around for I think a few weeks at this point, but it's a good resource and one that we can all contribute to and help each other. Looking at our extended collections beyond the digital, maybe we should be digitizing all those rare local materials that we have, supporting more than just text digitally, and then also loaning out technology. That's become very popular, and looking at non-traditional content. So at a library near me in California, they just started a seed library. So they're loaning out seed packets and helping people produce their own gardens, and I think that's cool. That's a great role for the library. When we look at reference services or information services, depending on what your library calls them, we need to ask the question, I think, are we still committed to doing this in libraries? Is this still an important key part of what libraries are and what we do? And in my opinion, it's our one competitive advantage. It's a thing that we do that no one else in the community does. Nobody. We provide information services, research help for free. That's amazing. And yet, we've not been exploiting that. We've not been, exploiting is the wrong word, we've not been using that to the best of our advantage. We haven't been going where people are. We haven't been pushing this as something that we can do for the community. And I would encourage us to start doing that, because I think that provides us with something that is unique and could be one of those saving factors that people are talking about right now because of library budget difficulties. You say, look, we do this, nobody else does this. You want this to continue, you need to fund us adequately. That reference service and kind of the slow and agonizing death of reference has been something very painful for me to watch, because I do believe it is one thing that we do that no one else does, and we do it darn well. Looking at programming as well, a lot of libraries have programming that they think is hot and current. We're doing tech programming. We have a basic email class. Well, that's great, and it does help address the digital divide, which is important. It addresses that long tail of people who are kind of trailing behind the bulk of your community. But the bulk of your community isn't have-nots, nor is it the bleeding front edge haves, the people who get the new device the day it launches. It's the sort of haves. It's that big group of people in the middle who have a smartphone but don't really know how to use it. Or they got a Kindle for the holidays and they've got one book on it, but they're not really sure what to do with ebooks now. Those are the people we should be focusing on, those people who all fall into that middle of the pack, who want to know how to protect their kids on Facebook, who want to know what Twitter is. Those are the people we should be focusing on. And I think it's important to remember the digital divide, but also to remember that we don't have endless resources, and we do need to focus our services where the most bang for the buck is going to occur, and that is where the most of your users are. And so thinking about programming a little bit differently in the future would benefit us, I think. Library catalogs, I just have to let out a big sigh because they're not so great. They've been getting slightly less sucky as time has gone by. They're not as bad as they used to be. They're slightly more Amazon looking. But issues of usability, they're not real usable. They're not integrated into our websites. You and I both know most of our users think our catalog is our website and have no idea there's this whole other set of resources for them. Federated searching has been found to have limited success in all types of libraries, and that federated searching was supposed to be the salvation for library catalogs, and so now that that's gone, what is a salvation? And I think it's serendipity. It's people's ability to find things, to stumble across things, to say, oh, I like this. What are other books that are similar to this book? Much as they do in other online sites, I think that's where library catalogs can continue to serve a purpose. But we need to be cognizant that they do kind of stink. They aren't well integrated with the rest of our web presence, and we need to start pressuring vendors and doing it ourselves to make that better. With library websites, my biggest question for all of you, what are you going to cut? Because your website is probably as bloated as every other library website I've ever looked at, full of information that everyone thinks is important, that's kind of grown up over time like a patch of weeds, and that nobody's ever gone back and said, well, these 5 are really important and get used a lot, but these other 50 we can get rid of because they get looked at by 3 people a year. Thinking more about your website as a function, as a way to connect people with information quickly, as opposed to a way to present as much information about as many things as possible. I think that shift is a big one. And focusing instead on function on our websites for what these products do for people instead of brand or category. So don't use the word databases. Don't use the word EBSCO. Nobody knows what EBSCO is except for library people, or maybe those few customers that you've educated. Oh yeah, you want articles? Go to EBSCO. Say what it is. If it's journal and magazine articles, that's what you should be calling that link, because that's what people will remember and that's what will connect them with their information faster. Mobile, we all know we have to go mobile right now. We have to provide as many of our services as possible via mobile. And likewise here, I would encourage you to pressure your vendors to provide their services on mobile. Many of them aren't. So looking at sites versus apps, where do you put your investment for mobile? Mobile sites are cheaper to develop, easier to develop, and more used by more people. Apps are great, but it does mean that people have to make that cognizant decision to download it onto their device and then remember to use it every time they need information from the library. And that just isn't realistic for most people. So develop your mobile site, and then if you have tons of money and no place to throw it at me. No, throw it at an app. I think an app would much more benefit your users. And then looking at augmented reality, this is something near and dear to my heart, which I think augmented reality is the future. So it's connecting local data that we have with the actual local physical spaces where that data makes sense and has an impact. So creating local walking history tours of your communities with resources your library has. helping people in the library wayfind around to different collections, or perhaps to the exact call number range that they were looking for. Genealogy information. So this little mock-up here in the slide is of what we could be doing with cemeteries, connecting photos and biographical data with the actual tombstone of the person who died. I think that's fascinating. But more than anything, just think about what you have that nobody else does, and most likely that's local data, and how do you connect that with the local spaces around you? And the answer is augmented reality, so keep your eye on that. Also think more about your computing services. So we talked about kind of making sure there's enough power and Wi-Fi in your library, but with the devices you're providing, you got to think about speed, your hardware and software, what drives and ports are open, whether you allow people to download and install stuff. All of these are things that our users expect today, and we should be providing them, along with spaces that work for them. So having spaces that are ergonomic, that have good lighting, that encourage collaboration, and providing that technical support, even if it's with a teen volunteer, which is something that we often do, to just help people out with their basic questions like, how do I attach this thingamajibber to my email? This is a photo that I took at a concert, a Muse concert, and aside from the little lasers, which are awesome, all those little lights that you see are people's phones taking video or photos of the concert. And what was fascinating was that after the concert, as we were all filing out, and it took like a good half an hour to get out of the concert venue, people were sharing what they had created on their devices. So every time you saw two heads gathered together, like you kind of do in the middle of the slide here, people were looking on the phones and saying, oh, look, I got this photo from this song, or oh, look at the video that I got at this point. And then comparing it to what the person next to them had captured. And that sense of community, of building content together, of sharing with each other what you'd built and were proud of, was just tremendous to see in action. So going back to our values and thinking about what our digital library values are translating into that world. Community advocacy. So going out into the community and talking to people about what we have isn't just about face-to-face anymore, it's also about a digital conversation. Focusing again on freedom of information, making sure people do have access to all of that information that they want to have access to, both in your library and outside of your library, which probably means advocacy on a national level. Providing that expert research help using the technologies that people want. Making sure people are aware of their personal privacy and how legislation and companies and their terms of service affect that privacy or their perception of their privacy. Remember that net neutrality thing. So if you're not familiar with that, look it up and share that information with your community, what net neutrality is and what that legislation is going to mean for us. So more than anything, just look around and ask the people that you're serving what would make their lives easier. And more than anything I talked about today, which was very technology heavy, very kind of ethics and value heavy, what people tell you they want, that's going to drive your services forward. That's going to determine the future of your library. Because ultimately libraries exist to make people's lives easier, better, and richer. And we can do that if we start asking those questions. So we are the library. In closing, what we do is we democratize information and expertise. And that is the most noble goal that I can think of ever in my life. I'm so happy to do what we do. And we are all fracking awesome. Got to throw a little Battlestar Galactica reference in there. And lastly, I just encourage you to start. So let things grow up from the base. Let things begin. If any of this is something you want to do or that you think your library should be focusing on, do it. There's nothing stopping you. Just push it through those committees. Push it through those recalcitrant people who want to say no. Just do it. Beg forgiveness later. And I'm happy to.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was pretty fantastic. I especially like the sort of end where you're discussing the idea that, even though we're talking about technology and it's easy for us to get wrapped up in the latest and greatest things, it's really about culture and relationships that we develop with the people that we are serving. And I think that that's crucial. Anybody have any questions for Sarah while we have her on the line? Feel free to type any of the questions you have in the chat box. Again, I will also remind you all that it is now only 8 o'clock in Sarah's time, so I'd like to thank you again for a fantastic presentation. It was really, really, really great. And it looks like some people are typing in some questions in the chat box. We'll see what they have to say. While you all are typing in some questions and your kudos for Ms. Houghton-Jan, I'll also remind you that because you signed up for today's session, you are automatically signed up for next week's webinar with Sarah, focusing on free or cheap web services for libraries. And you'll receive a link to that either later this week to log in. You'll also receive a link to the recording for today's session if you feel like what you learned today was beneficial to the point that you want to share it with your colleagues. We encourage you to do so in the spirit that Sarah mentioned. We do not have DRM on our video recordings, and we encourage you to share those with folks. Any other questions for folks as from people in the room before we close things out?
I'll just say thank you one more time, everyone, for having me, and do feel free to pop me a question on email or Twitter or Facebook or anything after today as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thank you all. We'll let Sarah get on with her day, and folks, I'll stay here for another minute or so if you have any questions for me, and I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday as well. Thanks.